to another edition of the Vine Resources podcast show. I'm delighted today to be in the offices of Clearbank. I'm here with the CEO, Charles McManus. Charles, thank you so much for inviting us.
Absolute pleasure. Nice to see you here at Clearbank.
And it's a beautiful office building in Devonshire Square in central London, in the city. Charles, I wonder if I can start, if it's okay, with just sharing with our listeners a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Clearbank, if that's okay.
Absolutely. So, as you rightly said, Charles McManus, I have the pleasure of being Group CEO of Clearbank, which has been an amazing roller coaster. So, as you'll see from the headline in relation to Clearbank, first new clearing bank in 250 years. When we first coined that, everyone thought, oh, it can't possibly be true. And we went back to all the record books, essentially, of a new bank that essentially are connected to all the payment schemes in the UK. So be it faster payments, BACS, CHAPS, the Bank of England, all at one time, and actually bring it up in one API connected to all the payment schemes. So that was really Nick Ogden's idea, who founded WorldPay and Cashflows, a serial entrepreneur in relation to payment schemes. He was the one that came up with the idea. I got involved with Nick and we took it on, and essentially from there in 2014, essentially we've now got, from 12 people, we've now got 263 in this building, and we've got a thriving business with a number of clients to be on board, waiting to be onboarded, and we're setting up in Europe. We'll talk about further developments in relation to the business.
There hasn't been a huge change in the industry before your company came on board in terms of the traditional options for companies to go to the likes of the big traditional banks. What would be the type of customer that may be coming to you now, or someone who's thinking of their payment options, some of the newer fintechs? Why would they be coming to you and having a conversation?
It's a really great question. And in fact, if you go back a few years in the UK market, there used to be 16 clearing banks. And again, back in 2014, when Nick was looking at the landscape, effectively there were only 4.
Right.
I mean, that's really quite a surprise. And actually, no one designed that. It happened through market consolidation. So a number of your listeners will recognise that Midland, for example, went into HSBC. NatWest was actually consumed as part of RBS. And through all that market consolidation, essentially it got down to 4 clearing banks. And there's been a number of Competition and Market Authority reviews of looking at oligopoly and monopoly within the big 4. The Cruikshank report is a really good example of that. And essentially it couldn't prove that there was price fixing in relation to consumers. But at the end of every single CMA report, there should be new entrants to this marketplace, and actually none arrive. And so Clearbank essentially was the 5th in relation to changing that. You rightly were asking who really are our customers. The short answer to that is, if you're a regulated financial institution, so you're an e-money license holder, an authorised payment institution, a credit union, a building society, a bank, essentially you need to clear your sterling payments through the UK marketplace on a daily basis. And essentially you can go to the big 4 and you can go through their legacy IT and their service in relation to BACS and CHAPS and faster payments, or you can essentially come to our ISO 20022 API. You get your payments to our API, and essentially we do the rest through Microsoft Azure and real-time payments and all that latest tech, which try to give you the experience as if you were a direct member of those payment schemes. So rather than spending a year or 10 million becoming a member of faster payments, through our API, you go through the certification process, and then within 6 weeks, essentially, you can actually connect the API, file your payments through our platform, and then we give you the experience to tell you exactly where your payment is in the clearing system. And so that's a very, very different experience to what you get, which almost would say faster payments is like a batch process on the big 4. You have no idea when your payment settles. You can see within our platform in the 3 cycles of faster payments every day exactly when your payment clears. And so for intraday liquidity management, managing cash flow, and payment finality. which is really important on the basis you click your button and do a faster payment. That doesn't mean it's settled. Whereas actually with our platform, you know when it's settled and it's done.
Yeah,
and
that's fantastic.
A big, big difference.
Well, and it was very clever on the name as well, and I'm surprised no one had that name. Maybe there's a story around the domain, I don't know.
There is, it's very interesting. I'll give you, Nick and I have an interesting joke about this because we did keep it all confidential for a number of years, and it was remarkable as to how actually it didn't really get out into the marketplace. And when we registered the name, in fact, it was a US paper that actually picked up the name and went after Nick and I in relation to Clearbank Limited, etc., etc. We made no comment and put them off. And then we had our launch day, and of course we came out with Clearbank. And Nick and I knew that essentially those original journalists that went into their editor that had the name Clearbank, that actually there was a clue in the name, but they didn't work it out until the day we launched. The name is really helpful on the basis of teaching everyone how to behave. Just be clear with our customers.
Yeah.
And it's obviously a clearing bank. It's worked really well, and I love the simplicity of it really because it does reflect exactly what we do.
I want to talk about who perhaps you admire, who's had an impact on you as a leader. You've mentioned a few names from your past, but who has perhaps been a mentor to you or someone you've looked up to, or maybe there's several, and perhaps how have they helped guided you on your own journey?
So there's a couple actually. I mean, there have been several. So first one is an interesting one, is one Chips Keswick. Chips Keswick was CEO of Hambros, the merchant banks where I grew up, of Schroders and Warburgs, and he had this uncanny nature of always getting the right topic and knowing where the weakness is or the right question to ask. Wasn't very good on the detail, and that had to come later as Barings crisis and directors on bank boards changed, and actually you need to know exactly what was going on in your bank. But what I loved about Chips was the style, the engagement, and the simplicity in terms of focus on the main issues. And he taught me a lot in relation to just interaction and personnel style. The second one was one Chuck Winograd moving to RBC, a hard-nosed investment banker who ran at RBC Capital Markets. High-paced, high-energy, very, very clever. And when I first started at RBC Capital Markets, essentially, I always remember he used to ask various questions, and he used to say to me, Charlie, you shouldn't say that you need to go and find an answer and come back. You should be able to answer all my questions straight off the bat. And even if you can't answer it, you should give me an opinion, right? 80-20, you should have a feel for the answer to that. So not only were you involved in the strategic conversations at Operating Committee, I need to know how much we were spending on paper clips or whatever the detail was. And very soon I realised I had to work immensely hard to actually be a master of the strategy, but actually really know the detail. And if I didn't have the right judgment to give a good enough 80-20 answer, that was brilliant grounding on the basis of the other aspect he used to say to me was, Charlie, I should only have to ask you once. Unfortunately, my team actually have to take this and the rest of, you can ask a question, but if I have to tell you the second or third time, there must be a problem. That soon makes you listen and process and execute well. And so that was very, very good training in relation to trying to get things right first time.
Well, definitely good grounding. And
very
I'm sure
good grounding.
Served you well over the years as well.
Absolutely.
I want to talk a little bit, you just touched on engagement as well, and I'm curious to see, in today's world, how you as the leader of the business keep your employees engaged from the top. Engagement
is everyone's got a responsibility in relation to participating in that. Again, a former chairman of mine, we used to go around the world and he'd go up to a junior on a desk and ask them a question, and they'd sort of freeze if God was in front of them. And Tony used to say to me, everyone in this company should have an opinion. Doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong. They've got to have an opinion. They can't just come to work and do a 9 to 5 and go home. They must have an opinion. And that always stuck with me on the basis of that challenge and input It doesn't matter whether it's wrong or right. It will just stimulate to get a better answer. And so client engagement, everyone is involved. In short, one of the things through popular demand really it was of actually our CPO, one challenge we had as an ExCo in considering how we can communicate better came to what we call the Thursday noon stand-up. And so to the whole bank, every noon on a Thursday, I or a member of ExCo stand up for 15 or 20 minutes and just talk about what's going on in the bank. And that's beamed to all of the bank, and people can ask questions, and it can be what happened at the board meeting, it could happen with a customer, it could be whether the netball team won the night before, it doesn't matter. But the whole team shares the success of the successes and failures. We've done that as a team, and it's been pretty hard. When it was 12, it's fine. Now it's 260, it gets harder.
And it's still going, yeah.
But it's still going, and we still do it every Thursday. And I believe, on the basis we move it all around and different, we have call-outs, whatever. But again, having worked in the US, I can't do the happy, clappy, and it's all wonderful. We still have the call-outs and exceptional performances, but it's more, I'd say, a more English style than perhaps the American style.
Well, I don't know if you've got a beautiful square down below. I don't know if you've had a chance to be outside with the team in the summer yet, but it's certainly a nice spot to be.
I think we're all working too hard, but at lunchtime, the buskers are very good, I have to say. It's a great vibe out there.
What do you think, Charles, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing business leaders right now?
It's a great question, and I've really struggled with the answer because I think there are so many different themes. My first theme was really visibility. Visibility on the basis of employees, of stakeholders, of regulators, the board, the media, a consumer. Something goes wrong, right? A company can't hide, and a CEO most definitely can't hide. And I think the demand, the thirst for either new joiners or a disgruntled employee or anybody of actually, where's the CEO? I want to talk to the CEO. And essentially being able to execute a business plan as well, satisfy that demand. But the other aspect of not just visibility, of course, is the age-old one, which is speed. Back at the Ambrose days, we can have long lunches, didn't have to work too hard, and we can make some quite decent money. Today it's full on. It's always full on. And to the extent there's an issue in social media land or a customer or whatever, you've got to be right on it. And so the pace at which you need to be able to respond and act and decide actually just gets faster and faster. And meeting consumers' demand or insatiable demand for speed and answers and explanation, you've got to be on your game, and you've got to be able to react fast, and you've got to be seen. You can't hide.
Just talking on that, if you I'm sure you've got some very good memories of some of those days of those previous days. If there was one thing you would miss about that environment, then what would it be?
Time.
Right. What do you mean?
It would be. I actually had a lot more. The speed of business was slightly slower, so you actually needed to. You did less. You could have more time to talk to people. So, I like to think that I delegate, pretty well. But even so, my diary and agenda in a fast-growing company of new customers or regulators or stakeholders or my team or issues or whatever it is, we seemingly had more time, right? And on the basis of something that was appearing in the press tomorrow, you had a bit of time to deal with it. Today in social media land, you don't have any time to deal with it.
What's the one best piece of business advice you've ever received?
Well, it's an odd one because really it's a sort of slightly intellectual accounting one, but actually it serves very well in relation. It's coming back to understanding. If you've got complexity and understanding something. And so in the financial services market, in particular in relation to derivatives, you can do it to any financial service product. And again, it was one Chuck Winograd at RBC that actually taught me this one, but it was the simplicity. And Chuck said to me, follow the cash. And so I've worked with a number of structured financiers, in fact the NatWest 3, who ended up in handcuffs going to, extradited to the US, coming up with the most complex SPV structures of all sorts of companies and spiders' webs in terms of the rest of it. Making sense of anything in relation to a highly complex derivative trade or a financial services product. Go back to where does the cash move through a product or a process. And if you follow that, that will give you a pretty good clue as to what might actually be going on and what's really going on in an end-to-end structure. And that's really interesting on the basis of, particularly if you get into options or complex products in relation to decompose a whole end-to-end process and have a look at the cash components in relation to that.
How does a new employee understand the culture of Clearbank? How does that come about in the company when they first join?
Simplistic answer, and a bit of a cliche answer, but actually the truth. And it's similar to being a customer. I know, again, an analogy between an employee, because first off is talk to the existing employees, right? And if you're becoming a new customer, what do you want? You want a reference of a real live customer, not someone that's going to give you a fake reference, but actually tell you what it's really like. And we have a graduate program, we have a really healthy induction program, we're taking on software developers, we're taking on lawyers, compliance, risk people, with all the spectrum of all the disciplines of the bank.
What does diversity and inclusion mean to you?
RBC, an international bank, we had diversity champions. I was fortunate enough to look after Europe and Asia, all of the various different countries sort of outside of the US and Canada, looked after New York for a while. I love working in various different centres and different cultures. And realising that, all the cliches of don't judge a book by its cover and all of those things, once you get inside, and it doesn't matter, there's so much today in relation to body image and you've got to be this and conform to that and everything else. Learned so much, again as a cliche, that individuals, you get below what it might look like or sound like, there's always a lot there. And indeed, in the new employee forums, when we go around and I do a CEO lunch for all new joiners and everyone talks about it, I ask them to actually say something give an interesting fact about yourself. It never ceases to amaze me what some of the people actually come up with. Absolutely astonishing in relation to telling someone else that's got nothing to do with work, and then opens up a whole nother conversation.
Is there a story that you could share from your childhood, something that perhaps influenced your work ethic late in later life? Is there anything you've got?
There isn't a moment, unfortunately. Okay. Sport was really important to me, and I just loved team games in relation to sort of whether it was hockey or rugby or it didn't matter what. And even on the individual sports, so athletics, and I used to sort of sprint and do long jump and various others. What I actually really enjoyed was the 4x100 or 4x400 metre relays, on the basis of 4 of us actually winning. What I loved, and my parents really sort of instilled in me, was you can be an individual sportsman and do it all individually, and it's all about you. And it is, in terms of doing your best performance. The aspects of team winning, I've always found something very special, and that has always been very important to me on the basis of, okay, well, if I'm not the brightest, I think I know how to be a great team player and play in a team and contribute.
If you had your time again and were just giving yourself, your 20-year-old self, one piece of advice, what would you go back and tell yourself?
Well, it's an interesting question because I've recently been approached on there's a charity mission that's going on, actually called One Golden Nugget. And it's an individual, a journalist, that got the idea of talking to business leaders in relation to give me a quote that actually would be useful to a next generation of something to do with your career and success. And essentially is building a book of all of those quotes. And actually, I don't know who I was referred to, but I had to refer them to another 3 business leaders that I respected, and on they go. And actually, it's a great website that's actually building now. I happen to got it here actually, in some brilliant, and there are some great quotes. Mine's a little bit cliche on a theme that I've already talked about. My quote that's going forward in all of that is as follows: no matter how good or bad you are, be a team player.